Hi everybody, welcome back. Let me conclude our discussion of the steel plant example by talking about the fourth potential solution to the uncompensated taking of the neighbor's rights to good health by the steel plant. This fourth alternative I'll refer to as social norms, and I'll describe the solution in this way. Administering any system of liability or taxation, as we've seen, is costly, it's cumbersome, it's late, and it often involves intrusions into the lives of all of the people who are party to the case. They must spend not just their time and effort, they must reveal a great deal about themselves, reveal a great deal about what's happened to them, and about the situation in which they found themselves. Wouldn't it be better, generally, to avoid all of these costs in favor of a kind of internal policing of cost imposers through social norms? That is, to produce people who don't want to seize the entitlements of others without compensation. Notice that the liability system, like the exchange system, attempts to influence the behavior of cost imposers by inflicting a particular kind of price on the activities that they undertake. So, in this view, we sort of assume that people, cost imposers, already know what they want to do, and then they're either deterred from doing it or encouraged to do it by the level of the price that they'll have to pay if they perform the cost imposition. If the price of the cost imposition is smaller than the benefits they receive, they'll impose the costs and pay for them. But if the cost imposition is worth more than that is, if the costs imposed upon the victims are greater than the benefits to the steel plant, to the cost imposer, then of his or her own volition, the cost imposer will simply not inflict the costs because the price is too high. In both cases, the cost imposer wanted the same thing, which was to impose the costs. In one case, the imposer was deterred by a high price. In the second case, the imposer might not be deterred because the price would be too low. Norms, contrarily, attempt to influence the behavior of cost imposers, not by placing a price on activities that imposers already know they want to do, but by attacking the preferences of the cost imposers directly. That is, by making or persuading the cost imposers that they get no value out of the cost imposition. They don't want to impose the costs. If they don't want to impose the costs, then they won't impose them, even if the liability price is very low, or even if it's very unlikely that they will be caught. The low price won't encourage them to commit the tort, to impose the costs, because in fact their social norm, the social norm that's influenced them, has already persuaded them that they don't want to do that. Let me illustrate this point with what a great economist, George Akerlof, I'll show you his picture in a moment, has called the market for lemons. In the United States, as you can see in the picture, there are literally thousands of places where you can buy a used car. But it's always very risky to buy a used car, much riskier than buying a new car. Most car dealers will guarantee that a new car will work exactly as advertised, and so most people who buy new cars are very confident that the car that they buy will in fact be worth what they're paying for it, because they haven't been lied to by the dealer and sold a car that is not worth as much as they think it is worth and as much as they're paying. This is obviously much more difficult with used cars. Used cars have been driven around by people that the potential or prospective buyer doesn't know, and dealers try very hard to persuade potential buyers of used cars that the cars that they're buying are in terrific condition and will run beautifully. But some used cars simply don't work, and Americans call used cars that don't work lemons. And to distinguish lemons from used cars that do work, Americans sometimes call the used cars that do work as they are advertised cream puffs. So the question before the floor is, what will the market for used cars look like if some of the cars being sold are lemons and some of the cars being sold are cream puffs. Let's do another thought experiment. Suppose that there are a very large number of identical used car dealers in a particular area, say 100 used car dealers, and each of the 100 used car dealers will assume sells exactly the same number of cars every year. Suppose, however, that one dealer in 10 sells only lemons, while the other 9 dealers sell only cream puffs. That is, there are 9 dealers who will sell cars with proper advertising that are worth exactly what the sale price says that they're worth, but there's one dealer in 10 who won't do this and will sell cars that are worth much, much less than the asking price. Suppose that the asking price of all used cars is $1,000, that a cream puff is worth $1,000, but that a lemon is worth nothing. In this situation, there exists what economists call an information asymmetry. That is, all the dealers know whether they themselves are selling cream puffs or lemons. But no dealer has any way to communicate reliably to any potential buyer whether that dealer is selling a lemon or a cream puff. Why? Because, well, the dealers who are selling cream puffs will quite honestly tell prospective buyers that the cars that they're selling for $1,000 are cream puffs and they are worth the full $1,000. But the dealers who are selling lemons that are worth nothing won't tell their prospective customers that they're going to buy a lemon. They tell their prospective buyers that they're going to buy a cream puff too, except these dealers are obviously lying in an attempt to deceive their customers into buying a car that is worth nothing and paying $1,000 for it. Since no buyer has any reliable way to determine whether the dealer is telling him or her the truth when the dealer says that only cream puffs are sold on our lot, then the prospective buyer must take into account the possibility that the car that the buyer buys will be a lemon and not a cream puff. If 9/10 of the cars are worth $1,000 and 1/10 of the cars are worth 0, then, just as we calculated before, the expected value of every car, cream puff or lemon, is 0.9 times $1,000. That is, the $1,000 value of a cream puff multiplied by the probability that any given car is a cream puff, and that value comes out to $900. But you'll notice that $900 is not enough to buy a cream puff. Cream puffs are actually worth $1,000, and therefore the honest car dealers can't sell their cream puffs for $1,000 because of the existence of the dishonest car dealers who are selling lemons worth nothing at a price of $1,000. The result of this is that no buyer will be willing to pay more than $900 for any car, and as a result, no cream puffs will be sold. The only cars that would be sold at $900 would be lemons, but now people will know that the cars that they will be able to buy for $900 will be lemons, and so no cars at all are likely to be sold, and the existence of the dishonest car dealers has essentially eliminated the market for used cars in this area. Even though buyers want cars worth $1,000 and are willing to pay $1,000 for those cars, and honest sellers want to sell them cars worth $1,000 for $1,000, the market will fail because of the dishonesty of the cheating car dealers and the information asymmetry that makes it impossible for buyers to distinguish those dealers who are selling cream puffs from those who are selling lemons. So, this problem was first developed in the way that I've described it by a great economist, as I've said, named George Akerlof, a teacher at the University of California at Berkeley. One solution to the problem of the market for lemons, or should we say the failure of the market for lemons, is to define selling lemons as a fraud, a crime or a tort, and then to use the liability system to limit its incidence. Again, this would address the problem of fraud by putting a price on the fraud that might be too high for the potential fraudsters to pay. So the attempt of the liability system, again, is to influence the behavior of the dishonest car dealers by making their behavior costly, by forcing them to pay the costs that their deceit would impose upon other people. But as we've seen, the liability system is costly and it's imperfect. Imperfect both in the inaccuracy that sometimes plagues its attempts at cost estimation and therefore the determination of the correct liability price, and it's imperfect in the sense that not every cost imposer is actually caught and brought to the bar of justice and made to pay the compensation cost. But again, suppose that we attack the problem not through prices, but directly through the preferences of the fraudsters. That is, suppose that instead people were persuaded that it is simply wrong to deceive people in commerce. And as a result of that belief, they forbear from doing the cost imposition because that's what they want to do and not because they're deterred by the prospect of paying for the costs that they impose. If this were the case, if we could rely on the cost imposers themselves to solve the problem by deciding not to impose the costs, we'd get more reliable externality control, and we'd achieve that externality control at far less cost than the liability system because norms work invisibly, as it were. We don't have to produce a machinery to manifest the law and then inflict the law on the cost imposer. The system of norms, if we can call it such, works silently and invisibly in the minds of the individuals who might have imposed the cost but are persuaded not to. This in itself raises a very interesting kind of question. As we've seen, it's inefficient for there to be fraud. That is, if there is fraud, Professor Akerlof's arguments suggest that there will be a lot of exchanges that people might be willing to undertake and that would benefit both sides of the exchange that won't be undertaken at all if there are fraudsters afoot, and the value of these lost transactions that would have benefited all parties is a serious inefficiency. So one reason to oppose fraud is that it makes for inefficient allocation of property rights. But most people think that fraud is simply wrong, that it's not right to lie to people in commerce and to deceive them for the purpose of profiting from them and then sticking them with a car that's worth much less than they thought they were paying for. Most people, that is, think that fraud is wrong. So an interesting question is whether there's a relationship between what's efficient and what's right. So let me close this part of the course by suggesting yet another thought experiment, this one due to another great economist, the Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek, and his thought experiment goes like this. Assume that at the beginning of human history, there are 100 scattered, isolated societies around the world. Each of the societies is very small, and each of them lives at a sufficient distance from all of the other societies that the societies come in absolutely no contact with one another. Each of the 100 scattered societies, we'll assume, is self-contained and has no contact with any other society. Then let's assume that completely randomly, 50 of these societies live by the norm that stealing is wrong. We won't inquire why they believe stealing is wrong, how they came to that belief. we'll just assume that in those 50 societies, people don't steal because they believe that stealing is wrong. Completely randomly, the other 50 societies, we'll assume, live by the opposite norm. Not so much that stealing is right and everybody should do it, but that stealing is not wrong. And therefore, if it's convenient for you and you think you have a good reason to do it, then you can go ahead and steal, and it won't be a problem with anybody else in the society. So we have these 100 societies. 50 of them live in one way with one moral code, and the other 50 live in a different way with the opposite moral code, and the two societies don't come into contact with one another. So let's see what will happen as life proceeds in these two societies. In the former society, the one that believes that stealing is wrong, let's suppose that the farmers go out in the spring and plant a crop of corn for food for the entire society over the next year. The farmers invest something in the land, they invest something in the seed, and they invest substantial labor over the course of the summer to produce the corn. And sure enough, at the end of the summer, the fields are rich with corn and the farmers are ready to harvest. And they're able to harvest the corn because all of the people in the society obey the norm that stealing is wrong. It may well be that somebody will walk by the cornfield in September or October and say, gee, that corn looks great. I'd like to have some of it for myself. Maybe I should just take it. But in this society, that individual will not take the corn because the corn would be stolen and stealing is wrong. As a result of this norm, the corn is left on the stalk for the farmer himself to harvest. He harvests the corn, he sells the crop, he earns the money that the crop has been sold for. The people in the society have the corn to eat, and the farmer has his payment, his compensation for all the labor and investment that he's made. And so, when the next spring rolls around, that same farmer will confidently plant another crop of corn, confident that he can again plant the corn, invest his money and effort in the production of the corn, and be confident that when the corn is ready to be harvested, it will be left on the stalk for him. Because there's no stealing, his incentive to invest is high, and because his incentive to invest is high, the people in this society eat corn. Now consider the 50 societies that live by the norm, stealing is not wrong. Here too, the farmers in the spring begin to invest a great deal of money and a great deal of labor in the production of corn to feed their fellows in the society. They too are blessed with a good crop, and as the fall approaches, it's time for this good crop to be harvested. But in this second group of societies, people now walk past the corn and they say, just as they did in the first societies, boy, that corn looks good. I'd like to have some of it for myself. And since the norm is that stealing is not wrong, they cheerfully walk up to the stalks of corn, pick the stalks, and take the stalks of corn away. Pretty soon, all of the corn is gone, and when the farmer comes to harvest his crop, he discovers that there is no crop to harvest. Therefore, he cannot sell the crop that he has harvested because it doesn't exist. And therefore, the people won't get to eat that corn, at least from the farmer. The people who have stolen the corn will get to eat it, at least for that winter, but people who haven't stolen it won't get to eat it unless they purchase it from the others. The real problem comes next spring. Now, in these societies, the farmer remembers what happened to him the following fall. After investing all that cost and all of that labor in producing a crop of corn, the farmer has found the value of that crop to him completely destroyed because his fellow citizens are comfortable in simply stealing the corn from him before he gets a chance to harvest it. So, all of his investment of cost and labor at the end has been a waste. And so the next spring he says to himself, am I going to plant corn again? Am I going to invest in the labor, invest in the seed, invest in the land to produce a crop that's simply going to be stolen from me in the fall so I can realize no compensation for the costs that I've incurred in growing the corn? Not on your life, he says. I'll just sit back and not grow corn at all. And of course, the result of that is that nobody has any corn to steal, nobody has any corn to eat, and the members of the society starve. After enough time, after several years of this, only the societies who don't steal are left surviving, because all the people in the other societies have died of starvation. And so the only people who are left are people who think that stealing is wrong. Everyone thinks that stealing is wrong. It's a universal norm. But whether it's right or wrong, it's obviously inefficient. And so the question then arises, one indeed which no one really knows the answer to, and the question is, are important, widely observed norms like don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, norms that are obeyed by and large everywhere on the planet Earth. All societies, all modern societies certainly have a norm against stealing, have a norm against obvious forms of cheating, have a norm against lying. It doesn't mean that people never do these things. It's that when people do these things, they get a pang of conscience and they know that it's wrong. Again, the question is, are these important, widely observed social norms what they are because they express universal moral truths, or because, more simply, they allow the societies that observe them to prosper, where societies that don't observe them fail? We finished our discussion of externality and the steel plant, and in the lectures that follow, I'll be talking about crime as distinct from tort, and speak about the criminal justice system as a liability system. See you next time.